been sending me your God Winks stories. We could use a few more, so if you have a story to send to me, please do so. But we have enough stories to create a devotional booklet that we will hand out, a Catch the Spirit devotional booklet that we will hand out on Pentecost Sunday. These God Winks stories you shared with me have been incredible testimonies of God's work in your life. I've had stories of people being thrown out of car windows, surviving, and I've had little things too, just little God winks of God's reminder that He's in our life. So as we're finishing this up today, I want to share one of my God wink stories with you. I've held off to the end because I wanted to share your stories. But this story happened about 20 years ago. My daughter Kelly was in the 3rd grade. I was working late one night at church. My wife called me and she said, Bill, we're on our way to the emergency room. Kelly's eye is bleeding. I thought, what in the world could that be? Later on, they came back from the emergency room. It turned out that her older brother was horsing around with her in the kitchen. He snapped her with a dish towel, and he hit her in the eye, and the concussion of the blow actually separated the pupil from the iris, and it hemorrhaged inside the eye. The doctor at the emergency room said, well, let's see what happens in the morning. These things resolve themselves sometimes quickly. In the morning, it was fine. She went into an ophthalmologist, and he said, well, it looks good. However, it's still healing, and with the high intraocular pressure in the eye, you've got to be careful. You've got about a 10-day window where you've got to let it heal. If it rebleeds, then we have other issues to look into. So on the 10th day, it started to bleed again. And we went back to the ophthalmologist, except he wasn't available to meet with us immediately. So I still remember we were in Southern California, Riverside, in Southern California, sitting in a Jack-in-the-Box eating chicken nuggets with her eye internally hemorrhaging. The doctor looked at it and he said, well, now you've got to do some other things because you don't want to do surgery. So she was flat on her back in the 3rd grade, flat on her back for 1 month. And she was given eye drops to paralyze the pupil so it would not move in response to light. The high point for her was I gave her a bicycle horn so she could honk us together she wanted in the house. So it looked like it was healing up, and we went back to Dr. Crater, just the kindest ophthalmologist you'd ever want to meet. Went back to him after 30 days. It was a 40-day experience, sort of like Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days, and you're just waiting. You don't know. We went back in, and it looked good to me. He looked at it. He looked at the eye very closely. He pushed the chair back. He looked at me. He looked at the eye again. Pushed the chair back and looked at me, and I thought, what's he going to tell me? It's not going to be good news. He said, you know, I've seen a lot of injuries like this, and anytime you have an injury in your body, there's scar tissue. And how scar tissue presents itself in this kind of injury is one of the pupils looks bigger than the other. That's a band of scar tissue. He says, I look into her eye and I can't see scar tissue. And I look into her eye and I can't see there was ever an injury. And he looked at me, he was kind of puzzled. He said, I've never seen anything like this before. He said, you must know somebody up there. And, you know, she's had 20/20 vision for most of her life out of that experience. I should have prayed as hard for me with my eyesight. So these are the stories we've been sharing, God Winks, how God Winks shows up. And what I want to talk about today is how God shows up. And I think God shows up in our life when we're at the end of our rope, when we don't know what's going to happen, when we're in the proverbial 40 days, so to speak, like Jesus or my daughter Kelly, we're waiting and waiting to see if that would heal or not. I think God shows up when we are at our greatest moment of need. In contrast to that, in the gospel reading today, and I shared it last week also, you have people who want to hoodwink God. And so hoodwinks and God winks is what I want to talk about today. You know a hoodwinker when you see one because they're trying to manipulate God. They're trying to put other people down and somehow raise themselves up in the sight of God. Ultimately, hoodwinking, I think, is about getting a better spot in heaven someday. And God winks, people who appreciate God winks, we know that we need the grace of God. We need God's help because there are moments in our life when we just can't do it, and we need God. I found this week, a definition of hoodwink, a verb. Hoodwinked, hoodwinking, hoodwinks. To deceive by false appearance or to dupe. And here are some synonyms for hoodwink: bamboozle, beguile, bluff, burn, con, deceive, delude, dupe, fake out, fool, hornswoggle, humbug, misguide, misinform, mislead, snooker, spoof, string along, or trick. Sometimes we try to hoodwink God. And we try to do something to get God's favor. We try to do something or to make ourselves look better than other people so that we somehow get a little bit more reward from the Lord. Who are the hoodwinkers? In the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, we see hoodwinkers are people who manipulated, coerced, or persecuted others so that they might look better in God's eyes. There is a great story. And Jesus, he met a lot of hoodwinkers in the gospel today that I read. There were the chief priests and the Pharisees, hoodwinkers, and Judas himself, the chief hoodwinker, trying to somehow do something to get a better spot for himself. Well, Jesus tells a story. It's a parable. It's just a story, but he takes it from real life. He knows some of these kinds of folks. Pharisees and tax collectors. Pharisees are very religious people. Tax collectors were the sinners of the day. And people did not like tax collectors, and I'm not sure it's changed a whole lot. But Jesus tells this great story, a Pharisee and a tax collector. And listen to the language here and think about hoodwinking God. Jesus also told this parable to people who were sure of their own goodness and despised everybody else. Once there were two men who went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood apart by himself and prayed, "I thank you, God, that I am not greedy, dishonest, or an adulterer like everybody else." The prayer of a hoodwinker, right? He's trying to hornswoggle God, so to speak, and to tell God how good he is when the truth is we're all sinners and we all fall short of the glory of God. I thank you, I'm not like that tax collector over there. I fast 2 days a week. A really religious person would fast 1 day a week, so he's that religious. I fast 2 days a week, and I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector stood at a distance and would not even raise his face to heaven, but beat on his breast and said, "God, have pity on me, a sinner." That's the prayer of a person who needs a God wink. I got nothing left. I need the grace and the mercy of God. God, have pity on me, a sinner. I tell you, said Jesus, the tax collector and not the Pharisee was in the right with God when he went home. For those who make themselves great will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be made great. Who are the hoodwinkers? That's a great example. Trying to point out other people to God and saying, you know what, I'm better than that person. I deserve better. I deserve more heavenly reward and more blessings in this life. Who are the God winks? Well, Jesus again gives us a great description of not just hoodwinkers, but those who need a God wink. Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount. And many of you have heard these words before. It's the Beatitudes. And Jesus says this, blessed or happy. Blessed are those who know they are spiritually poor. The kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Blessed are those who mourn. God will comfort them. Blessed are those who are humble. They will receive what God has promised. And the Beatitudes go on and on. And what Jesus is saying is when you're at the end of your rope, just cry out to God, and God will be there for you, and there are God winks for you. Now, in the time of Jesus, those who were poor, spiritually poor, those who were humble, those who mourned, they were not seen as blessed. They were seen as being punished by God. And if you had riches, if you had favor, if you had good health, that was a sign that God was winking on you. Jesus turned it all upside down. And he says, when you're at the end of your rope, when you've got nothing left, when life seems to have done its worst to you, when you're stuck in a season that you just can't seem to get out of, then God is there to wink on you. We saw it in the gospel today. There was a little God wink mixed into that story. And lepers did not get God winked. Our Good News translation says there was Simon who had had a terrible skin disease. It was just a nice way to say it. He had leprosy. In the ancient world, he didn't get cured. And lepers were pushed off to another end of town. And people stayed away from the lepers. But here was Simon, who was cured of his skin disease, cured of leprosy, and he's thrown a big meal for Jesus, a big party, and they're all gathered there, and they know Simon's story. They have to know Simon's story to be there. And then a woman comes in who really wants to worship Jesus. She's very thankful. I'm sure God has done great things in her life, and she takes this expensive perfume. She anoints Jesus. And listen to the response of people there. Some of the people there became angry. They know the story of Simon. They know he's been healed. They know how good God is. But they disregard the God winking. And instead, they're into hoodwinking, right? Some of the people there became angry. It's an amazing line. And said to one another, what was the use of wasting the perfume? And they made a big noise about how it could have been given to help the poor. It probably would have been given to themselves to make a bigger dinner feast. Lepers did not get God winked, and people forgot it. People forget so quickly. That's why I've invited people to share your stories, your testimonies with me, your God winks, so to speak, because we need to share those things because people forget how good God is. And people forget, and then we start trying to work a little bit harder so that maybe we can do something a little bit better, so that maybe we can be better than our neighbor, or maybe we can be good enough that God can finally do something for us. But God's not waiting for us to get better or to do more. God's just waiting for us to be at our end of our rope. And that's when we get God winked. We so easily forget what God has done. So it's important to share our testimonies with one another. At the end of the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew chapter 28, Jesus says, go into all the world and share the gospel. Baptize people. Bring them into the church. Jesus is saying, tell them what God has done for you. They didn't have, in Matthew 28, they didn't have a Bible like we have. They couldn't go out and say, here, I'm going to read you from the Bible and I'm going to share with you this story. No. Personal testimony is what they had. And Jesus says, go out to the whole world and share your God winks, because God surely has touched you. As we close out our series on God winking today, I thought it was so appropriate that we baptized little Brody. Because if you've been baptized, you've been God winked. That's the foundation for all of God's people. When we are baptized, whether it's as an infant, or as a youth, or as an adult, it doesn't matter. We have been born again into the family of God, and God has winked on us in a very special way. The great reformer Martin Luther, he would go through tough seasons in his life. And he wrote, when I'm really struggling with something, I remember I have been baptized. I say to myself, Martin, you've been baptized. And even if the day was not going well, even if he was not feeling good about himself, he could remember that he was baptized, he was God-winked, and that made the difference for him. So as we head to Easter, remember, God loves you. And remember, when you're at the end of your rope, so to speak, that's probably when God can do his best work with you. And we come together next week on Easter, and we remember and celebrate that when they had done everything they could to Jesus, the hoodwinkers of that day, they had done everything they could to Jesus, there was a resurrection. And we all need God winks, and we all need a resurrection. Amen.